Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Grow Your Tutoring Business with me, Richard Cowell. Today we're meeting with Brooke Bounds, who is a trauma specialist. She talks about how trauma that is experienced as a young child can actually impact us way, way later on in life. She shares some case studies with people she's worked with in the past. More importantly, she talks about our inner child and how things from our inner child can come out and try to protect us, but actually they don't really serve us when we're particularly business owners, because it's things like procrastination and perfectionism can get in our way, but they're actually there to protect us and keep us safe. Get your notepads ready and enjoy the podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. We've got a special guest with a different perspective on business today. This is Brooke Bounds. She is is it fair to say like a trauma specialist, Brooke?
Yeah, trauma-informed coach, therapist, yeah.
Excellent. And we were talking just before we pressed record, and it was like, well, what could we share today? How can we kind of segue in the word trauma? And I thought, well, if I share a little bit about my journey away from teaching and how it was kind of put to me a few years later when I had a coach, a business coach, and then you can share some ideas around that. Would that be okay?
Brilliant. Sounds great.
So I moved away from teaching. I moved to be an assistant head at a school, and we just wasn't a good fit for one another. Basically, because they're not that it was a bad school; it was actually a good school. But the way they wanted to teach and monitor and for me, it was quite a lot of over the top stuff that wasn't always focused around what children actually needed and what was going to improve their learning. And that was just like my take on it. And I did try while I was there to make a few like slight changes, but it wasn't ever really going to be listened to. So it got to a point where I was like, look, do you know what? I don't want to be here anymore. It's quite clear you don't want me to be here anymore. And straight away they were like, well, you can leave on Friday then. It was like, we just want you out. And that was quite a traumatic experience because I had a young family. I needed to have a job. I needed to pay the bills. And although I didn't leave, and there was like a kind of elongated discussion over sort of 2 or 3 weeks with the unions involved, we got to a point where there was a mutual understanding of what was going to happen next. But I was kind of left with, and I've spoken about this before in other podcasts, I'd wrapped my identity around being a teacher. So if I wasn't going to be a teacher anymore, what on earth was I going to be? And that kind of sat with me for quite a while, even when starting off my tutoring business. And it wasn't until a couple of years later, I had a coach, business coach, and we were talking about exactly this basically, but more in depth. And she was saying like the language that I was using and the way I was describing it was like quite a high level in terms of using the words like trauma, for example. And she was like, actually, we need to reframe it into something different. And it was at that point I started to realize that I needed to change the story. It wasn't so much about changing the language. It was like, actually, this has served me in some way and put me into a better place. But I just hadn't really rewrote that incident into something into the positive. And that's what we was talking about before. And you gave some insight into what trauma actually is. And so let's start there, Brooke. So what is trauma?
Great question. Trauma is what happens when we have an incident or an event, just like you just explained, and it's whether we actually process what's happened or how we think and feel about the event afterwards. Like you can have two people that have a car accident, and one of them can walk away and think, "Oh, yeah, thank goodness, I'm in one piece, I'm alive," and go on their merry way and not have any thoughts about it. But another person who's in the same car can end up with PTSD, but it depends on how
Mm,
much trauma they've had previously. So if you can imagine your body's like a swimming pool and like all the beach balls that go in it, it depends on how many beach balls you've already had in your life as well. So it's not the actual event, it's how you feel about it and whether you process those feelings there and then, or whether they're validated, or whether you're kind of like shut down and told to be quiet and just get on with your life. So you don't actually process how you feel about what's just happened. So it's all about how we feel about the event. That's what creates the trauma. So like with the instance of like two people having a car accident, one person's like really grateful that he's alive. The other person's like, oh my goodness, I can't never get in a car again because I could die, which is
mm.
creating a trauma for them and making them really wary about getting back into a car again. So it's really thinking about how we actually deal with the event at the time.
So why does one person react one way, like in that kind? Not, I would say it's positive, but the kind of looking at the bright
Yeah.
side of just been in a car accident. Thank goodness I'm alive. You know that's their take, and then the other person is like, oh my goodness, I can never get in a car again. Why would one person react one way and one person the other?
Well, like I said, it's like if you imagine your body like a swimming pool, and so maybe the person that walked away and said, "Thankfully, I haven't, I'm alive and I'm all good." They haven't had many beach falls, as in trauma in their life that has been unprocessed. But the other person, if he's got a swimming pool full of beach balls, i.e., unprocessed trauma,
Mm,
it will be just another thing on top of it, which is like, okay, he hasn't got the capacity to process it and deal with it and see it in a logical way. His
mm,
body's reacting to it rather than actually thinking from the prefrontal cortex of like logic. Yes,
mm,
I had a car accident, it's a one-off, and yes, I am alive and I can walk away from this. But he was constantly probably thinking, oh my goodness, this could happen again, this could happen again, and building
mm.
up that fear in his body. And that's because he hasn't processed what's actually happened to him, because he may have had other unprocessed trauma in his life before as well.
So the traumas that we experience will stack up over time if we don't process after the incidents afterwards.
Yes.
So they'll stack up over time. So how do we make sure we stay on top of processing these incidents so they don't turn into trauma? What's the kind of general way of looking after ourselves?
It's being aware of when things happen, and often people see trauma as like a major car accident or
Mm,
a soldier that's gone off to war. And I have so many clients say to me, well, I don't think I've got any trauma because
mm,
but like I said, I mentioned my book before. I wrote a book, and one of the clients in there, she had a trauma from when she was 7, when she was at school, and the maths teachers asked her to do a sum on the board and she got it wrong, and he threw the board rubber at her and said, "You're useless at maths." Of course, at that time, she was really embarrassed in front of all her
mm,
friends. Nobody was there to like talk to her and say, "Actually, no, no, you're not. The teacher's having a bad day." So because it was an adult and she was a child and she hadn't got
mm,
that critical faculty to reason, maybe the teacher was having a bad day, maybe he had an argument with his partner, maybe
mm.
he tripped over the cat, whatever it was, that
Yeah.
that she automatically think, okay, that must be true, that must be my fault. So she's carried that sentence with her up until like she was in her 50s, when she needed to do a maths exam to get a promotion. So she called me and she said, I need to do this, but I can't deal with it because I'm too traumatized about doing maths. But
Mm.
again, like you said about thinking about it differently, excuse me, I got her to think about maths differently, because she was very clever and she could do maths, but she just thought she was useless because of that one particular
Wow.
sentence. And trauma isn't about how big the actual event is, it's
Mm,
how you feel about it afterwards. So,
mm.
yeah, if you see some people walk along the street and see a rat, and they'll go, "Oh, that's a rat," and carry on walking. Another person will be going, "Oh my goodness, there's a rat!" They're like
Mm.
panicking, thinking they may get bit, they may end up with like a disease and rabies or whatever. But it's the same situation, but it's how people think about it and how they react to it, and they process it afterwards. And it's all about getting that validation. Now, had my client who had the board rubber thrown at her ran out of the room and saw another teacher who actually said to her, "No, it's not, you are good at maths because," and kind of told her the evidence of why she was good at maths. It's just that your teacher, is in a bad mood today. So, and helped her to process what actually happened. She could have then like moved on with her day and not had a trauma, but that trauma got stuck in her body, and she carried it with her until she met me at 50, and we processed it and released that trauma.
So in terms of the actual processing after, and I suppose you said about right at the start about recognizing that incident had taken place in because sometimes you won't even realize, right? So like I mean I'm thinking of teachers now and myself. There'd be times when I've said something which I probably thought was okay at the time. I don't think I've never told anybody they're rubbish at maths and thrown a board rubber at them,
Yeah.
but there might be comments that I've made flippantly. There might be comments that I've kind of like for me would be throwaways, but they might be taken to heart by children and young people. So if you're on the opposite end of that, let's say we're the child or the adult and we're receiving the information, how do we then process that? Because it seems like some of it is about the finding the right evidence that kind of counters it.
Yeah, and it's like thinking, is that actually true now? When my clients come to me and they say all the things that they feel traumatized, I'm like, okay, is that actually true now? Is that what happened when you were like 5 or 6? And like,
Yeah.
well, actually, yeah, no, that isn't true now. So okay, so what do you want it to be true now? But it's validating that how the person feels. And as children when we're growing up, and we often hear, don't cry or I'll give you something to cry for. Like, with men, it's like,
Mm,
man up, men don't cry.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
if they feel upset, they kind of stuff their feelings down, and that can
Mm,
create the trauma rather than actually just crying for half an hour, releasing that, letting it out, letting your feelings be heard, and
mm.
having that validation, and then you can just move on with your life.
So I've been involved in a few things like this in education. So I ran a nurture group at school. So I came out of the classroom after about 5 years. I've done a lot of work with SEN, like and as an assistant Senko. Didn't do my Senko training in the end. We just ended up going down running a nurture group, which was really about trying to support young children in sort of between probably age 7 to 11 who were at risk of exclusion to keep them in school. But the main purpose was to allow them to sort of regress back, not just in the curriculum sense, but also from their, I suppose the what we would consider milestone stuff that would be in the red book. In the UK, we have the red sort of health visitor book, don't we, where we keep all of our graphs and our quartiles where we kind of try and make sure children fit into particular parts of the graph. So there's lots of stuff like that going on, and most of the time those children had experienced something in their life which had then caused a trauma. So, for example, most of the time it was the loss of somebody. So either like they had experienced the loss of a grandparent at a really young age, but someone they felt quite close to. I say young
Mm.
age, sort of, between within their memory part, which was probably from about age 3.5 onwards. I know it can be slightly younger for some children, but about 3.5 years onwards, we start sort of collecting memories. And it was about looking at how do we help them process or even give them the space where they can talk and share about some of these feelings, because a lot of them were just, well, they were mainly boys, not all of them, but mainly boys who had been told just to, you just got to get on with it.
Yeah.
And we're talking about really young children who don't have, like you said earlier on, like the access to the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is about logic. It's about those things that just happen in front of your eyes straight away, attachment and all those kind of really important stuff we have in our lives. And like, and bless them, sometimes it was, I mean, one, I don't, not, it's not a cure, but it certainly helped him. He had never been to see, he'd actually lost his dad. He'd never been to his dad's grave ever. And he only lived about 15-minute walk away, but his mum just wouldn't ever let him go. And it was
Mm.
really important to him, but mum didn't realize that. So we ended up being like this mediator between the two of them. And well, we didn't take him. We kind of arranged for the mum to take him, and he was different, like something that just helped process some, whether it was
Yeah.
some sort of a closure, or, and he had older brothers and sisters who used to go to the grave as well. So there was like this weird, I don't know, there was a weird push and pull, and we had a family who was kind of was for it, but at the same time wouldn't allow him to go until we kind of said this is quite important, and that for him was quite a big thing.
And so you helped him process it by actually hearing him and seeing him and letting him be heard and seen. And what we have to think about is trauma can go back 7 generations. And often when an adult sees a child crying, it makes them feel uncomfortable. So they try their best to cheer them up and kind of like forget about what they're crying about, rather than just letting them cry it out and talk about what they're feeling, because it feels uncomfortable for the adult, because the adult's got inner child wounds as well of not
Stuff.
feeling good enough. So if my child's crying and upset, what will people think of me? So I need to make them all smiling and
Oh,
happy, so
so
people think I'm
interesting.
a great parent. So it's
Yeah.
understanding that that's a very, so for that mother that didn't want the child to go to the grave, she may be thinking, well, he'll get really upset and I can't handle it
Mm,
because I'm already upset myself. So it's better for us both if we don't go to the grave. Maybe she thought he was too young to go. And I was
yeah.
exactly the same. My granddad, who was my hero, died when I was 6. And
Mm,
I was devastated and I wanted to go to the funeral, but my parents said, no, you're too young.
mm.
And I always regret that they didn't let me go, because it was been my way of like kind of like saying goodbye
Yeah,
to him. But,
closure.
you know,
Mm.
obviously, I was born in the late 60s, so children were, it was different, and children were seen and not heard, and they didn't go to
Mm,
funerals or things like that. But at the
mm,
time I was absolutely devastated, thinking my granddad would want me to be there to say goodbye to him, but I couldn't obviously articulate that to my parents at being 6. And I can remember crying for months and months and months afterwards, you
mm,
know on my own, because I couldn't cry in front of my parents, because my mother, because she's a narcissist, would have not allowed it, and my dad would have got too upset about it because he'd just lost his dad.
mm,
So it's understanding that, you know had they have like sat me down and chatted to me and let me cry and process it, I'd have probably felt a lot different about it. But they were doing like the best they could with what resources they had. And it's always thinking about, I know you've got a lot of teachers in your audience and tutors,
mm,
and if they're thinking, oh my goodness, I've said this to a child or said that to a child, don't beat yourself up, because we all try and do our best with the
mm,
resources that we've got. Unless you happen to be a narcissist, and that's a whole different ball game there. But most teachers, are kind, caring teachers, and why they've got into
mm,
that profession. So it's recognizing that in ourselves as well. When we feel uncomfortable with something happening, it's our bodies telling us there's something that where we need to heal as well. Like, I used to be really, really uncomfortable if anybody else cried, and think, oh, I need to make everybody happy, because I
mm,
was a very unhappy child, so people need to be happy. But now, if my grandchildren come up to me and they're crying because they're upset, I will just let them cry and talk to me
mm,
for about half an hour about how they're feeling. So they're processing what they're feeling by talking about it in crying, because that's our body's way of cleansing, so they can just get over that event that happened, because they've processed it, and then they can go back on their merry way and not probably remember it. They may remember it if they like fell over and got a scar on their knee, and say like, do you
mm,
remember when I was 5 and I fell over and I had this scar and you were there to comfort me? They can remember it, but not in a way like, oh, every time I go out and fall over, I'm going to get another scar on my knee. So therefore, I can't go out and run anywhere, because I don't want to get
yeah.
another scar on my knee. So it's how they think about it, and how the people around them allow them to have those feelings. Because as a society, we don't like people crying, because it makes us feel uncomfortable. Now, my clients cry an awful lot, and I actually cheer when they cry, and they think, oh, I say yes, because it's you processing and it's you releasing that trauma.
Mm,
So it's really good to cry. And they're like, oh, really sorry, I didn't want to cry in front of you, I don't want you to feel like really bad because I'm crying. But I actually let them know that it's a really safe place with no judgment for them to just cry. So then they carry on crying, and sometimes it can end up like a tsunami of tears if they've been holding them back for years. And I just hold that space for them.
mm. It's it. I've got so many questions in my head at the moment. Like, I think the first one is, let's just follow on from that. Like, why do we feel that need to protect ourselves in that way? Like, put that guard up, when I think deep down we all know talking about it will make us feel better overall. And then, like in the case of the lad I was talking about and his mum, and you're totally right about the whole, like, if he goes, he's going to cry and he's going to get upset, which is then going to make me feel bad and feel pain. Like, why do we have that? Because that doesn't serve us. So why is that something that we think about? Because it doesn't serve us in the long run, and usually we've eliminated the stuff that don't really serve us. Why is that still around? Why have we not figured that out yet properly?
It's because of like our inner core wounds, and there's four main ones, like not feeling good enough, not feeling worthy, not feeling important, or not feeling lovable. So that mother may think that she wasn't doing a good job as a mother, because
Mm,
she didn't know how to handle dealing with the death of her husband, because it's not something she was expecting to do. So she may not feel good enough. Her inner child may not feel good enough as a person to be that mother. So rather than actually sort of feel that pain of having that wound of not feeling good enough, it's easier and less painful, even though it's still painful, to bury those feelings and just kind of like put on a stiff upper lip and just carry on, and
yeah.
pretend it's not happened. Because but eventually, as you bury these feelings and these emotions, if you imagine your body like a canister, you keep burying them, and
Yeah.
the canister fills up, but eventually it
Overflow.
overflows, and it
Mm,
can come out in different ways. Like, a lot of my clients have pain in their shoulders, their necks, headaches, stiffness, backaches.
mm,
It can come out like fibromyalgia, autoimmune systems,
mm,
IBS, fatigue. even arthritis, inflammation in the body, because those emotions have to come out somewhere. And if you're not actually processing and releasing them, they will come up in your body and show up in your body somewhere. And
Mm.
I had a client once who she was a regular client, and she came to me on a Monday. We'd had a session booked in, and she looked really, really grey. And she was holding a hand on her chest, and she was going, oh my goodness. I said, are you okay? She went, no, I'm struggling to breathe, but I needed to see you today. And I'm like, well, no, we can reschedule the session. Please, if you're feeling not well. She said, no, she went to A&E the night before with really bad pains in her chest because she thought she was having a heart attack, got all checked out. And she said, there's nothing physically wrong with her. So she said, I'm sure it's emotional trauma that I've got stored in my body. So because I knew that she'd been checked out by the medical authorities and she wasn't fit something physical, because I
Yeah.
always say, if any pain, go get it checked out by a medical professional. We then worked on her emotional trauma, and we released that. And I watched the color come back in her face. And after our session, she had a rest for an hour or so. And then she's like, I felt so great. I went out and done some shopping, and the pain had completely gone, because it can show up like that, because we hold it all in. And it's a bit like if you had some food that you put in a bag and left it there, it would eventually go moldy and fester, and then you know it wouldn't smell too good, and it would make you feel bad. And it's the same with us when we push down our emotions. They
Mm.
fester inside of us and have to come out some way. So it's really thinking about what's happened in your life, and we're talking about being stuck. Where do you feel stuck? What comes up for you, what comes up in your body? And it's being aware of what comes up in your body and how you feel in your body. So like if you feel a bit anxious or you feel a bit scared, that okay, well, I need to kind of just bury that and just get on with it. Well, actually, no, it's better to actually get curious as to where that anxieties come from, or where that fears come from, what beliefs and thoughts you're having around that, where they've come from. Are they even your beliefs and thoughts, or are they somebody else's beliefs and thoughts? Now, I grew up with a mother, like I said, that had got some huge inner child wounds. And if I didn't dress as she thought appropriate, or I didn't do something she thought was appropriate, she would say, don't do that. What will the neighbours think? Which I thought was quite hilarious to start with, because I lived on a farm and our neighbours was like the farm down the road. So we didn't technically have any neighbours. But I grew up worrying about what everybody else would think, because my
Mm.
mother thought if I dressed in the way that I dressed, and it wasn't appropriate to her view of how a child should look, then other people would think she's not a good enough parent because
Mm.
she's not dressing her child appropriately. So we end up growing up with our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents' beliefs that are passed down, but we don't ever check in with ourselves and think, actually, are they good for me? Do they help me? Do they serve me moving forward? They may have worked for my grandparents or my great grandparents, but that was a
Mm.
completely different generation. So, what do I need to do now? What do I want? And how can I sort my belief system out so I can think differently and not have those constant feelings of what has been passed down from generation to generation?
Mm. And you said earlier on about that 7 generations, is that right? Back
Yes.
7 generations. That's doesn't sound like feasible, does it? Like just on the face value, like that far back. That
Yeah.
just
Well,
sounds
I'll tell you
crazy.
a little bit of a funny story just to lighten it a bit, because it can get quite heavy. In my book, that I'll share the links
Yeah.
to in the show notes. I tell a story, and it's not my story. It's from Zig Ziglar. If anybody knows who Zig Ziglar is, he was a motivational speaker, and it's a story about a couple that were cooking a roast ham on a Sunday, and the wife automatically cut the end off the roast ham and put it in the tin and started to cook it. And the husband said, can I just ask, why do you do that every time you cook a roast ham? Why do you cut the end off the ham? And she said, well, because my mum always cut the end off the ham. And he said, well, I'm just curious. I'm going to go ask your mum why she does it. So they rang the mother up, and the mother said, well, I do it because my mother did it. So he said, right, so I'm really getting curious now. So he phoned the grandmother up and said, grandmother, why do you always cut the end off the ham before you cook your ham? She said, well, I cut the end of the ham because my roasting tin's too small. It won't fit in if I don't cut the end off. So grandma had a reason that served her.
Oh, I do like that. That's really good.
So yeah, you think about it. Grandma had a reason what she was doing, and it
Yeah.
served a purpose
Yeah.
because it helped her But the mother and the granddaughter had bigger roasting tins, so they didn't need to cut the end of the ham. But they
Mm.
did it because that's what the family had always done. They
But then
didn't stop and question it.
the idea, yeah, was exactly that. Going back to your point just a few minutes ago, is like get curious, just ask a question. Like, and even if you're just asking yourself in that moment, like, so you're feeling anxious, or something's happened, or maybe you've heard. So something weird happened to me yesterday. I was interviewing somebody for a podcast, and they also have a podcast. I was like, I'm going to listen to them for a bit, and I had it running during the day, and they were speaking about a particular topic. It's about school, it's about education, and one of the obviously they're like short 15-20 minute podcasts, and one of them was about phrases in schools that don't really like do anything, or the most hated phrases. And one of them they spoke about was called this non-negotiable. And in schools, people who are listening who are tutors and teachers will know exactly what I'm talking about. Your senior leaders will come in and go, right, this is a non-negotiable. And it used to put my back up, because I used to think, well, you can't be bothered to tell me why this is important. And so I am the curious person. I'd be the one
Mm.
who would go, well, why are we doing this? And they would go, it doesn't matter, it's just non-negotiable. And I'd be like, well, no, but why are we doing it? You know, that I'd want to push it. And so that there, I was always the one that was either considered being rude or insubordinate, but in reality is actually, I feel that's poor leadership. If you don't want to explain why, or the reasons, or the impact that this particular initiative would have, then why should we do it? You know, don't just say it's a non-negotiable. But I was talking about it on this podcast yesterday, and I felt angry about it. Like, I was like, why am I angry about this? I don't have non-negotiables now. Like, this is something from like 5 or 6 years ago that still riles me up. And I was talking about it in a really fun way, but I still felt my body had a reaction to that word, which was bizarre.
Okay, so how I work with my clients is to, it might help you to illuminate this a bit. I believe we've got us as our true self, as our adult self, and then we've got our inner child.
Mm.
But then we've got what's called protector parts that come in when our inner child feels like they're not good enough or worthy, or they're scared. So these protector parts can be anger,
Mm.
anxiety, procrastination, perfectionism, overwhelm, overeating, self-sabotaging, all of those things. So it's our body's given us a signal, it's given us feedback. So your body's feeding back to you that your inner child is feeling insecure in some way. So your anger part has come in to like get your angry and riled up, so you can like protect yourself, to keep yourself
Mm.
safe. And it's like the anger part's like, tick, job done. He's got angry, he can protect himself. So it's all about keeping your inner child safe, because your protector parts always see you as that little 6 to 7 year old or 5 year old, until you actually process that and start to heal your inner child, and then
Okay.
they won't need to show up anymore. So like with me, I used to get really, really angry at the things my mum said to me as a child. But now, because I've healed and processed them, I mean, she used to say some horrendous things to me, bearing in mind, like, she's a narcissist, like, I was ugly, I'd never amount to anything, she wished I died when I was born, all these
Oof.
things. So, and and then she would say, you're not normal like other children. I was so desperate to be normal. And I used to hate it when people used to call me weird. It used to make me so angry. But
Mm.
now I don't like being normal. I love actually being weird. I like to celebrate the fact I'm weird. But it was because I wanted to be normal, to be like the other kids. And I thought my mother may love me if I was normal,
Mm.
realizing now it wouldn't work that way for her being a narcissist. But at the time, it was like I desperately wanted to be normal. So if anybody called me weird, it would anger me,
Yeah,
because,
sure.
my inner child wound was being like poked at, and it
Mm.
would hurt. So the anger would come up to protect me. So
Okay.
it's like now you're getting curious. I'm obviously not doing it on the podcast, but after this podcast, get a bit curious as to where you in your childhood were you not allowed to do things. They were like non-negotiable, that just had to be done whether you liked it or
Mm.
not, and how you felt about it as a child.
Mm. Okay. I mean, in a way, though, some of that stuff, as a child, we get forced to do lots of things, don't we? So it didn't need to be something quite like something I could remember and it stands out, because, we get told what to do with children, because there's lots of things that I
Yeah,
would have done. I mean, I wasn't the perfect child. I was in trouble all the time. So I
join the
reckon,
club.
I think I need to have a good long think. Do you know what? The best person to talk to is my mum. My mum will tell me, I'm sure.
Yeah, but you see, your mum may have had some non-negotiables, just like your senior
Mm.
person. He may have been taught that, okay, these are non-negotiables, so he's
Mm.
just passing on what he was taught. But if you
Mm.
actually had a conversation with him out of school and said, you know, why do you think you all say about non-negotiables? He probably think, well, that's because that's how I was taught. and he won't have thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And it's weird. There is a link to the podcast, the one I'm talking about in the other podcast that I recorded yesterday. So I know teachers will be interested in this. There was another one on there, which was about, well, this is the way we always do it, which I feel that other phrase is, well, we're doing it because that's how we always done it. Also goes side by side with non-negotiable as if you ask a question beyond the non-negotiable, it will be, well, this is the way we've always done it. And so they go hand in hand. Now, I definitely have feelings about that because that's similar to what you were saying about cutting the end off a ham, right? That's what I've done it because I saw that person do it. And in a way, I suppose we bring that as even as parents, because I know I've done this before where I've maybe chastised my own children in the way that my mum and dad would have chastised me, even though I was a bit like at the time, I'm not sure I really want to do it like this, but this is how, it's all I know, you know?
Yeah.
And only changed really when I started educating myself a little bit more in other models and getting interested in things like psychology and things like that. So it's really interesting. Can we wind back to something which I've got to turn my page, just making a ton of notes. There was something you said earlier, but it's basically about rupture and repair. And we could, because what we've spoken about are quite extremes, because at the start you was talking about like that child who heard that message, like, oh, you're rubbish at maths, which compared to say like through having trauma through loss, and it doesn't matter about the scale, right? Because traumas to someone they process it after. Some things you have an opportunity to repair, like that teacher could have gone, oh, I told you he was rubbish at maths yesterday. Look, I didn't mean it. I had a bad night. It was just me. It's on me. You're really not rubbish at maths. Look, and then prove it to them. And they could go and repair that rupture that they created.
Yeah, that would have been them processing it and helping that child out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I used to deliver some training to schools and it was a solid hold approach. I don't know if it's something that you've heard of before. But solid hold approach was basically designed by health visitors and then clinical psychologists, and they came up with basically the triangle, which is containment, reciprocity, and then behavior management. And the idea is that you go in as a practitioner, because I was taught this when I was at social services, but you go in as a practitioner with the aim to contain. In that case of social services, that's true because you're going in and, listen to the parents or the carers and the children. You're going to listen. You're going to make sure they feel heard and validated, which is exactly what you're talking about in terms of the trauma. And then reciprocity is a two-way process. So that's pretty much what it means, is then you're now going to feed back something in a way that's quite manageable, that they can then process in a way that is relatable to them. And if you do those two things, that's going to hopefully bring around some kind of behavioral change. And that's the whole process. And when I used to go to schools and deliver this training, we used to stop a lot at rupture and repair, because we are all human and we always say, we'll say things we don't mean in times when we feel stressed or we're under pressure in some way, which is basically what school is like. We're under pressure and there's lots of time issues, and you're trying to get children to certain levels, and there's lots of targets and things you've got to meet. But that's okay. Like you just said, like, it's okay. We will do things and we'll say things, but go back and find time to repair. But you can only do it if you know what you've done. Isn't it? It's being aware of, I've just done this thing. And you might not be like there and then, but it might be a few hours later where you've gone home and gone, oh, there's something in my brain that's niggling away. Oh, I think it's this. I'm going to talk to them tomorrow just to make sure that it's okay. Go back and repair it. But what do you do if it's like that's in those situations? What if it's not like that? What if it's way, way bigger? If it's something that needs to almost have specialist support in a way, what would you recommend? I mean, I'm kind of taking it back to a scale, and I don't know how useful that is. Do you get what I mean between like that kind of like that throwaway comment, or someone, I suppose our scale is someone receiving a throwaway comment which has had long lasting effects, to someone who's lost somebody who can't repair it, somebody like their dad's died, for example. So how do we one catch it, and also what do we do in terms of the extremes?
Well, it's like it depends on what it is. Like, obviously you can't magic his dad back for him, but what you can do is like listen to him and let his feelings be heard, so he can process that. And of course he's going to be grieving, and it'll be a loss that he may never recover from. My dad died when I was my granddad died when I was 6, and I'm 56 now, and I still miss him as much today as I did when I was 6 years old. But
mm,
it's dealing with it. I used to not be able to speak about him without bursting into tears, but I can now talk about him in a nice, loving way, because that happened so long ago. But it's understanding, it's thinking about the person that's in that situation and what they want and what they need, and how you can help them as well.
mm,
It's that try not to, like, invalidate them by saying, oh well, yeah, you'll be all right, you'll get over it, time's a good healer, you'll be all right in 6 months time, because
mm,
that's just invalidating all their feelings, which will again hurt their inner child wounds of not feeling good enough in the first place.
mm.
you know
I spoke to somebody who's a grief specialist a few months ago, someone who I met a couple of years ago at a business conference, and she we were basically talking about grief and how it's dealt with overall. And I was saying about my experience of this at school and with social services, because a lot of it was about a loss of some sort, not always a loss of someone dying, but often like the parting ways of like parents going in their different directions. And the way that we're trained to deal with it in school is actually counterintuitive to what has actually been taught to people like grief specialists like Gulam. And like that, I find that really frustrating, because often schools in particular, I mean preschools as well and secondary schools, sort of between anything that, I mean, even beyond then, even daycare centres who sort of take sort of babies, have baby rooms from 0 to 16, are often the front facing people that are the first ones to encounter the families beyond the specialist, and yet we're not given the right tools to deal with it. And I'm talking about grief here, but actually we could say the same for trauma. Like,
mm.
are we delivering the right messages to the people who are going to be working with these children and young people for quite a big, large percentage of their day, where these traumas might be coming out and need processing? Because we don't actually allow a lot of space for that stuff to come out. Like, I'll be honest, you've got a classroom of 30 children in front of you, and you're trying to get through a learning objective to do with maths, but Sadie comes up to the front and says something that probably needs processing and needs some time to share. I'm not going to give her the time, because I'm going to say, you need to go and sit down, Sadie, because we need to get on with maths. And that's then counterintuitive to what she needs at that point. So how do we balance those kind of things out as well? Is there a way of getting this message out to the right professionals as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would love it if all professionals were trauma informed, so they
Mm,
could actually recognize that. So when you have the situation with little Sally coming up, you could say to her, like, we just need to get this bit done, but
mm,
afterwards, after this lesson's finished, I'll come and have a chat with you, and or
mm,
note it, so you can actually get her to have somebody to talk to, because obviously she wants to talk to somebody because she's come up to
mm,
you, and if it's you that she trusts, how can you work it so you can make a bit of time for her, or get the specialist help that she actually needs, so
mm,
it doesn't turn into a trauma, so she can move on with her life, so she doesn't end up with an adult who's procrastinating, self-sabotaging, and
mm.
getting stuck moving forward in their life.
Oh, this fascinates me, because this is exactly one of the reasons why, like, I loved teaching, but it was never just teaching. There was always other things, and I love that as well, which I suppose why I ended up doing the nurture group and going down that route. But finding the time to do those things is always difficult. But I'm a big believer in what you're saying there about being held in thought as well, like being held in thought. Although it is actually an actual process. Like, we hold a baby when they're anxious or they're tired, and we wrap them up, we keep them
Mm.
contained. And then when they get older and toddlers, we still pick them up and hold them, or we wrap them in a blanket. And then as we're older, we still give hugs. But essentially, when we send our children out, we can hold them in our thoughts as well. And if you've got the right attachment style and you've done all the right things, that is as good as a hug. And I think you can do that with your children in your class as well, or in your tuition business. If someone's going to say something, you say, actually, right now, I am thinking about it. We definitely will find time. Why don't you come and see me at playtime? Why don't you come and see me the first 10 minutes of lunch, and we'll sit and have a proper
Yeah.
conversation? And that will probably be enough to just hold and contain what they've got. They know they've got a place to come and talk to you a bit later on.
Because
I
it's
mean,
back to being seen and heard. That child had been seen and heard by you, because you said,
mm,
okay, I see you, I hear you, in effect, but
mm,
I'm thinking about you, and we'll chat, when we've got the time to actually chat about it, because there's no good trying to like rush it through in between
mm,
a math session. And
Yeah.
so
You got 2 minutes. Go, Sally. Tell
yeah,
me now. Yeah, it's
yeah.
not going to work. Yeah.
So that, they get through to that, a minute and
Mm.
50, and they're still crying their eyes out. Okay, right, stop, because you need to get back to your lesson.
Yeah.
So it's like with me when I have my clients, my sessions normally go from an hour to an hour and a half. And I say that because, like, if at 1 minute, so if the session's like 11 till 12, but 1 minute to 12, they're kind of having a breakthrough. I don't want them to think, I need to like kind of like stop and hold back. We just let the process carry on a bit. And I've had clients come to me and they've just, because they know it's a safe place with no judgment, they've said hello, started crying, cried for the whole hour, and I've just sat there with them. And they've said afterwards, I feel so much better. That was a great session. Thank you. And I've hardly said anything, but people just need to be seen and to be heard. It may sound ridiculous, but the saying is half the world is going to bed hungry for food, and half the world is going to bed hungry for affection and to be recognized and noticed. So it's just noticing what people do, and especially our children.
It's again another fascinating point. This was just at the end of me leaving social services to go and do something different. But we used to do a school-based service. It was early intervention, and schools used to put in referrals. They'd come to our team in social services, and we would go and do like what we called a CAF assessment, a common assessment framework. And I worked with this young lad, basically in sessions of 6, and I used to go to 12. We used to double it up in most cases. And I remember going to supervision after about the 5th session, and I was chatting to my supervisor, and I was saying, I'm not really sure what I'm doing with this lad. Like we just generally I used to go and pick up this lad. We used to go to the local park. We used to kick a ball about, and the focus was on something which really wasn't a problem for him. It was about his anger, but it really wasn't anger at all. There was something else. And again, there was things happening at home, not from a safeguarding perspective, but it just wasn't as supportive as what it should be for he was 10. And we just used to go to the park and literally do nothing. And I was like, look, this is the fit. We're coming up to the last session. I don't think we need another 6. And my supervisor, social worker, way more experienced than me. I think I was probably 24, 25 at the time. She was like, look, Rich, actually, just got a feeling that you should go out for another 6. And I did the other 6 exactly the same way. I used to pick him up. We used to go to the park, kick a ball about, have a bit of a chat. And I used to try and guide the conversation towards school. I used to try and like force it. Nothing. We did a review at school after 12 weeks, and the school were like, oh my God, I don't know what you did, Richard, but he's just been a different child. And I was just sat in my chair thinking, I haven't done anything. I haven't done anything at all.
You did loads. You saw and heard him.
That was it. And it's just that
Yeah.
coming back to that. And this is when I started to realize that the idea of that containment and reciprocity, which probably fits into lots of your, like what you was talking about earlier about the listening and validation and those kind of things. I was like, actually, this kid didn't need someone to sit down and do, where is your anger coming from? How does it feel? He needed to just go and release some energy. He needed to talk about the things he wanted to talk about. He needed a bit of time and space that was just for him. It wasn't about anything else. And he knew he had someone to talk to if he needed to. And he
You
did talk
accepted
about
him as him, for
yeah.
him and who he was. And that's a huge thing as well.
And it fascinates. And again, like I just became not obsessed, but I mean, the sort of hold approach has always been something I always come back to. It's kind of now embedded in. I think, right, am I containing? What can I feed back in a particular way? Am I listening properly? Am I really attentive? I'm actually present in this conversation, because I feel like that was the bit that really makes the difference. And if you can feed back and give it back to people in a way that's more manageable, it's a bit like you said. In the solid hold approach, it's often we call it like the Coke bottle or the milk bottle, that we have a level point for our emotions, and if we don't release them, they spill out and they often hit the people around us, right? But the people that are closest, particularly for children. I mean, if you're a parent and your child comes home from school and they're really horrible, and sometimes they're horrible to you, or they say horrible things, they don't really mean it. They've just had a day where they're at the top, and you're the
The
safest
container's
person.
full. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's about it, really. And a lot of the time when I used to run parent workshops, they'd be like, oh my God, I didn't realize. And suddenly the family dynamic changed, because they just, rather than make it into an argument, they would just go and let them have space and go, yeah, okay. And they understood it. And it's just, the solid whole approach for me was such a good framework in a really basic level, that it meant that I felt like I was doing a job, even when actually it didn't really feel like I was doing much at all.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
holding space for somebody is an amazing thing, because how many people get space held for them, that time to just to be who they are, and to feel what they ever they want to feel. We don't, because we're so busy in our day-to-day lives that we don't get that chance to do that very often.
No, we don't. And Brooke, I'm thinking that we've probably only just scratched the surface with some of these things, really, in that helpful way. And I'd love people to come and find you. If there's people listening now thinking, yeah, we haven't even really spoken about the business side of this yet, really, like in how that we can get out of our own way. But I think one word that you've said a lot about that protective, that inner child, they bring out that procrastination. Now, this is something I talk a lot. Well, other tutors will ask me about how do you stay focused, how do you keep going and get rid of procrastination. I think I haven't mastered that at all. I still go and wash up rather than sit down and do create the social ads or social posts. So I feel like that is something I'd like to make sure that people can find you. So I know there's a free Facebook group.
Yeah.
And how else can people kind of connect with you?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn, on TikTok, or on Instagram. And also, if they want to email me at brooke@brookebounds.com, I do offer a complimentary 30-minute call, and I do answer all my emails personally. So if anybody wants to reach out or think, oh yeah, that could be me, I think I've got some trauma I didn't realize, reach out to me, and come and have a chat with me. There's no pressure of anything. You can just have a nice 30-minute chat with me, and we can find out where the trauma is, and how you can deal with it.
And you've also got a book as well.
I have. Yes, it's a book called You Can Have It, How to Break Through the Self-Sabotage Cycle. So it's like 12 chapters with exercises at the end of it to go through, and that's available on Amazon. And I'll share all the links with you. I'll email you the links so you can pop
Right.
them.
Well, in all the show notes, we'll make sure every link is there for you. And you also mentioned about there's a free boot camp.
Yeah, on the 18th of September, I'm doing a free boot camp called Heal Your Inner Child, Heal You, which is talking all about how you can start that process of healing your inner child if you feel that, well, yeah, I have got that wound, but I don't feel good enough or lovable, worthy or important. And that's why I'm procrastinating or self-sabotaging, or got that perfectionism part come up. So you can click on the link and join that. It's a free 3-day boot camp, and there's a private Facebook group with it as well. So you can come along and share whatever you want to share in there, and learn some things, and have a bit of homework to do as well to help you to start to heal on that journey.
It's been amazing to actually talk about this stuff. It's not because it's something which I really love talking about, but often don't get the chance to now, because I often talk about business with tuition, and I just in my own tuition world. So it's been really lovely to sort of take this for me is like a bit of a step back through time. And I've got a bit of a fire in my belly about this topic, because I see it with young children in particular, where they're going to carry that through with them into adulthood. And then also now me helping or attempting to help other tutors and other adults into creating a life that they deserve through business. And you can see that there's sometimes something in the way of them being the best version of themselves. And I feel like this could be the door they need to walk through so they can actually achieve the life that they can. They can fulfill their potential.
Absolutely, yeah. It's that ripple effect that I'm so passionate about. But I love helping my business clients. If they're in a business, and they can go on and help their clients, and it's that ripple effect that you're helping people. Like a lot of my clients say, oh my goodness, you've helped my relationship with my partner, you've helped my relationship with my children. I can show what I've learned with my children, and so they understand their feelings, and how it's good to show their feelings so they don't bottle it all up and end up with the trauma that's trapped in their body. So it's that wonderful ripple effect is fantastic. So you're doing a great job there.
I feel like there's definitely a part 2 that we could go a bit deeper into some of the business
Absolutely.
side of this. I think there's definitely a part 2 if you'd be up for coming back again. And also, I'm going to encourage anybody who has sat and listened and gone, oh, I do a lot of this, and that really resonated with me. Go and connect with Brooke. We'll get all the links out there, but the free Facebook group, the boot camp, go and throw yourself at this, because it could be the thing that you've been waiting for you to then accelerate your business life and your personal life as well. So thank you, Brooke. I've really appreciated your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you for inviting me. I love chatting to you, and I look forward to part 2.
Thanks, Brooke.